Get your hands off the armrest and get up. That seat was never meant for someone like you." The words came from Denise Callahan, lead flight attendant of Crest Atlantic Flight 1183, and they landed in the cabin like a dropped tray of glasses. Every head in first class turned. In seat 2A, a man in a charcoal suit did not move. His hands stayed folded over a scuffed brown briefcase, the leather soft with age, a single silver cufflink catching the overhead light on his left sleeve. He did not raise his voice. He did not raise his eyes. He simply said, "I paid for this seat in November. I would like you to check again." Denise did not check again. She smiled the tight smile people wear when they have already decided something and only need the world to catch up. To understand how a Tuesday morning in Charlotte, North Carolina turned into a national headline, you have to go back 6 hours to a kitchen with a cracked linoleum floor and a man named Marcus Webb standing at the counter at 4:50 a.m., pouring coffee into a paper cup because he liked the weight of something disposable in his hand before a long day. He was 51 years old. He wore the same gray hoodie he had worn on a flight 11 years earlier, the zipper replaced twice, because his late father used to say that a man's comfort should never depend on who was watching him wear it. Marcus did not look like the chairman of a $14 billion airline holding company. That was, in more ways than Denise Callahan would ever admit, the entire point. His father, Walter Webb, had been a machinist in Greensboro who spent 31 years fixing engines for an airline that would not let him sit in the cabin he serviced. In 1974, Walter had been pulled from a coach seat he'd paid for in cash, accused of using a stolen ticket, and made to stand at the gate for 40 minutes while a supervisor verified a purchase that had never been in question. He never told the story with anger. He told it, once a year on the anniversary, with the calm of a man describing weather. The last thing Walter Webb gave his son before he died was a pair of silver cufflinks engraved WW, the only nice thing he had ever owned outright. Marcus wore one on the plane that day. The other stayed in a small wooden box on his desk in his headquarters office, 40 floors above downtown Charlotte, in a building whose lobby bore his company's name in brushed steel letters that Marcus had specifically asked not be gold. That was the man sitting in seat 2A when Denise Callahan decided he did not belong there. He had boarded at 6:12 a.m., scanned his own pass at the gate like everyone else, thanked the gate agent by name because her badge said Priya, and he had learned, over 3 decades of low-key travel, that people remember being seen. He had settled into 2A with his laptop bag beneath the seat in front of him, and his phone turned face down on the tray table the way he always did before takeoff, a habit from a man who believed the first 10 minutes of any flight should belong to nobody but the moment. Denise. Denise Callahan had worked Crest Atlantic's premium cabins for 14 years. She could tell you the difference between a lawyer's watch and a knockoff from 30 feet. She had built her identity, plank by plank, on the idea that she was a gatekeeper of quality, that her instincts protected the cabin from people who did not understand its rules. Nobody had ever told her that instinct built entirely on appearance is not instinct at all. It is guessing, dressed up in a uniform. "Sir," she said, the third time when she approached him. Close enough now that other passengers had begun lowering their magazines. "I need you to show me a boarding pass that matches this seat, or I will need you to gather your things." "I already did," Marcus said, twice. Somewhere behind them, in row 3, a 24-year-old woman named Sophie Bennett had her phone in both hands. She was flying to Denver to sit with her grandmother, who had come out of hip surgery 9 days earlier, and still couldn't manage stairs alone. Sophie was not the kind of person who inserted herself into other people's conflicts. She had spent her whole life being the quiet one, the one who let things go, who told herself that speaking up rarely changed anything. But something about the flatness in Denise's voice, the practiced condescension of it, made Sophie's thumb move to the record button before her brain finished deciding to do it. Keep that thought. The video Sophie Bennett was about to start recording would end up in front of more people than the Super Bowl halftime show reaches in the United States. But right now, it was just a girl in row 3, hands trembling slightly, watching a stranger get erased in real time. A junior flight attendant named Renee Ortiz stood near the forward galley curtain. 29 years old, 6 months into working first class after 2 years in coach. She saw everything. She said nothing. She had watched Denise train new hires, had absorbed the unspoken rule that questioning a senior attendant in front of passengers was its own kind of career suicide. Renee's silence in that moment would cost her something she wouldn't fully understand until later that afternoon, standing in a galley with red eyes of her own. "I don't understand the confusion," Marcus said, still seated, still calm, in a way that unsettled Denise more than shouting ever could have. "My name is on the manifest. My payment cleared. What exactly would you like to see?" "People fake documents every day," Denise said. "This cabin has had issues before. People sneaking up here, using upgrades that aren't theirs." "People like me," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Denise's mouth opened and then closed. In seat 1C, a businessman named Roger Ashworth sighed loudly and checked his watch, the universal gesture of a man who believed every problem in the world was primarily an inconvenience to his own schedule. "Can we please resolve this?" he said. "I have a connection in Denver." That gave Denise the exit she was looking for. She turned toward the cockpit door and knocked. Captain Gordon Hale stepped out a moment later, 58 years old, 29 years with the airline, the kind of pilot who had built his entire professional identity on the idea that decisiveness equals competence. He took one look at the tense cabin, the raised phones, the ticking clock on departure, and made the oldest mistake in aviation psychology. He trusted the person in the uniform over the evidence in front of him. "Sir," Hale said, "I'm going to need you to step off the aircraft with us so we can sort this out at the gate. Here is where you should pay attention to the cufflink. It will come back." Marcus looked down at his hand resting on the briefcase, at the small silver disc catching the light, and something crossed his face that was not anger. It was older than anger. It was the particular exhaustion of a man watching history repeat a sentence he had heard his father say verbatim. 50 years earlier, in a different airport, wearing a different uniform. "You have my boarding pass," he said quietly. "You have my identification. You have a payment record sitting in your own system right now. What you don't have is a reason." "The reason," Denise snapped, "is that you're making everyone uncomfortable." Sophie Bennett's stream had crossed 4,000 viewers. A comment scrolled past her screen. "Why is he the only one being questioned?" She didn't answer it. She didn't need to. Captain Hale kept his voice level, but something in his shoulders had already started to fold. "Ground security," he said into his shoulder radio. "We need assistance at gate C14. First-class passenger, non-compliance." The words hit the cabin like a change in air pressure. A child 3 rows back started crying without understanding why. Roger Ashworth stopped complaining and simply watched. The older couple across the aisle, Harold and Ruth Whitman, married 41 years, retired school teachers from Asheville, exchanged a look neither of them wanted to name out loud. Marcus leaned back into his seat and set his briefcase gently on the tray table. "The way you'd set down something you were tired of proving belonged to you." "Shh. You should have asked better questions," he said, to no one and everyone. 2 security officers boarded 4 minutes later. Officer Carla Jensen came first, 42, compact, sharp-eyed, the kind of officer who had learned the hard way that assumptions cost careers. Behind her, Officer Diego Ruiz, 28, newer, his hand drifting near his belt in a way that made Marcus go very still, and made Sophie Bennett's stream jump another 600 viewers in 11 seconds. "Slow down," Jensen said, holding up a hand toward her partner before he'd even fully understood why. "Who is the passenger?" "Him," Denise said. "Seat 2A. Confrontational, questionable ticket." Jensen looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back, steady. "Sir," she said, "can you tell me what happened?" Before he could answer, Denise cut in again. Sophie, from 3 rows back, spoke over her without meaning to raise her voice. "He didn't do anything. He showed his boarding pass twice. She kept saying he doesn't belong here." The cabin went very quiet. Not the quiet of people waiting. The quiet of people realizing they had just heard something they couldn't unhear. Jensen crouched slightly toward Marcus's row. "Sir, would you mind showing me identification?" Marcus opened the briefcase slowly enough that nobody needed to flinch. Inside were folders, a tablet, reading glasses, and a slim card holder. He handed over a Georgia driver's license first. Jensen compared it to the boarding pass. Everything matched, cleanly, the way facts do when nobody is lying. She handed it back. "That still doesn't explain the seat," Denise said, refusing the plain arithmetic in front of her. "It was purchased," Marcus said, "with money." Nobody laughed. It wasn't funny. It was just true, and true things have a way of sitting heavier in a small space than jokes ever do. Denise's tablet chimed. She glanced down, thumb moving fast across the screen, typing something she would regret before the plane had even reached 10,000 feet. Passenger non-compliant. Suspected fraudulent ticket. Potential cabin disruption. Each phrase made her sound safer. None of them made her honest. "Be careful with that report," Marcus said, without looking up. "Words written in panic tend to outlive the panic." That sentence landed somewhere behind Captain Hale's ribs, though he wouldn't understand why until later. He had signed reports exactly like that one, more times than he wanted to count. Clean language, official tone. A human being flattened into 3 bullet points. Marcus reached back into the briefcase, unhurried, and Officer Ruiz tensed again. Jensen raised a hand before he could speak. "Mister," she looked at the license, Webb. "What are you retrieving?" "A card," Marcus said. "This one might help you listen faster than the last one did." He drew out a single business card, matte black with silver lettering, and passed it to Jensen. She read it once, then again. Her face changed, not fear, recognition. The particular stillness of a person realizing the ground under a situation has just shifted 20 feet to the left. She handed it to Ruiz without a word. His posture folded inward like a tire losing air. Captain Hale stepped forward and took the card himself. He read it out loud, though his voice had lost most of its command by the second word. Marcus Webb, Chairman, Continental Crest Holdings. The silence that followed was not quiet. It was total. Even Denise, for the first time all morning, stopped moving. Continental Crest Holdings was the parent company of Crest Atlantic Airlines. Denise Callahan had spent 14 years serving first class on a fleet owned, ultimately, by the man she had just accused of not belonging in it. "That cannot be right," she said, more to herself than to anyone. "Why not?" Marcus asked. It was a small question. It finished off every defense she had left standing. Captain Hale's phone rang before Denise could answer. He flinched at the sound and answered on the second ring. The voice on the other end was crisp, controlled, and loud enough that the front 3 rows heard every word. "Captain Hale, this is Vivian Cole, Chief Operating Officer of Continental Crest. You are currently speaking in the presence of our chairman. Under no circumstances is he to be removed from that aircraft. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am," Hale said, closing his eyes. "I also want the crew member who challenged his seating removed from passenger contact, effective immediately." Denise's face drained to something close to gray. Captain Hale looked at her, and for the first time that morning, he saw not his trusted lead attendant, but a woman standing in the wreckage of 9 sentences she couldn't take back. Here is where the story could have ended, cleanly, with Denise Callahan Frog marched off the plane in front of everyone filming. It would have felt satisfying for about 90 seconds. It would also have missed the point. Marcus Webb had spent 30 years learning the hard way. Punishing one person quietly does nothing to stop the next one. "I don't want anyone removed yet," Marcus said, raising a hand slightly toward the phone. "Not before they understand what happened." Denise stared at him. She had braced for cruelty. Mercy in the middle of ruin was somehow worse. It meant he wasn't finished. It meant he wanted her to actually see herself. And there was nowhere left to look but straight at what she'd done. Vivian Cole's voice came back thinner through the speaker. "Mr. Webb, with respect, legal is advising containment." "Containment is how we got here," Marcus said. And there it was. The frozen moment. The one that would end up quoted in half the news coverage by that evening. Nobody in the cabin moved. The overhead vents hummed. Somewhere behind the curtain, a coffee pot clicked off. Denise Callahan stood exactly where she was, and for 3 full seconds, nobody breathed loudly enough to be heard. Marcus reached for his tablet, unhurried, and turned the screen so the front rows could see it. Sophie Bennett's camera caught enough of it that within the hour, screenshots of the document would be circulating faster than the airline's own press office could keep up with. The header read Continental Crest Holdings, Internal Equity Review. In the last 2 fiscal quarters, Marcus said, this company logged 61 formal complaints from premium cabin passengers who were questioned more aggressively than the passengers seated around them. The pattern isn't subtle once you actually look at it. Black passengers, older passengers traveling alone, veterans with visible disabilities, people who, for whatever reason, didn't match somebody's private idea of what belongs in row 2. Nobody in that cabin was thinking about Marcus Webb anymore. That was the moment the story stopped being about one seat. Ruth Whitman pressed a hand to her mouth. Roger Ashworth, still in 1C, looked down at his own shoes, his face slack with something close to shame. Officer Ruiz shifted his weight, suddenly aware that his own hand near his belt had become part of the evidence against the airline he'd been sent to help. "I didn't know that," Denise said, so quietly it barely carried. "Would it have changed how you treated me?" Marcus asked. She opened her mouth. Nothing came. The silence was honest, which was exactly why it hurt. Captain Hale rubbed a hand down his face, the gesture of a man aging 5 years in 5 seconds. "I need to say something," he said. "I believed my crew because that's what I was trained to do. I looked at a calm man with valid paperwork, and I still escalated, because I trusted fear over facts. That's on me." Officer Jensen, still standing beside him, said only, "Belief isn't the same as verification, Captain." He nodded once, stiffly. He knew it. He'd known it the second he'd picked up the radio. Denise's eyes filled, and she fought it, the way people fight tears they've spent a career believing were a weakness. "I was trying to protect the flight," she said. "From what?" Marcus asked. "From fraud, from delay, from—" She stopped. Every explanation sounded thinner than the one before it, and she knew it. And everyone in that cabin knew it too. She looked at the boarding pass, sitting untouched on his tray table, at the driver's license, at the black business card, at his steady, unshaking hands. Then she heard her own voice from 20 minutes earlier, playing back in her skull with the clarity of something that would replay for years. "Get your hands off the armrest. That seat was never meant for someone like you." "I made an assumption," she said, "before I had a single piece of evidence. Nobody rescued her from the sentence. Marcus let it sit exactly where she'd placed it." Sophie Bennett's stream crossed 80,000 viewers, while the cabin sat in that silence. Not a single person cheered. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a wound getting cleaned out in public, necessary, and it stung exactly as much as it needed to. If you think the story is close to over, you're about to learn the airline's real problem was never Denise Callahan. It was everyone who watched people like her for 14 years and decided it was easier to look away. The plane pushed back from the gate, 91 minutes late. By the time it landed in Denver, the video had already outpaced them. Through the terminal windows, passengers could see 3 news vans parked past the security perimeter, a cluster of airline executives waiting near the jet bridge, with the particular stillness of people who know a camera is about to find their face whether they're ready or not. Vivian Cole boarded before a single passenger was allowed to deplane. She walked past Denise without a glance and went straight to seat 2A. "Mr. Webb," she said, "the board is assembled. Legal is standing by. Every major outlet in the country wants a statement inside the hour." Marcus rose slowly, adjusted his jacket, picked up the briefcase that had sat between him and this entire ordeal since 6:12 that morning. "This starts with the passengers," he said, and turned to face the cabin. "What happened here isn't your fault. What happens next belongs to all of us." He looked deliberately at Sophie Bennett. "If you recorded today, keep the full video intact. Don't cut it down for clicks. Don't turn someone's worst morning into entertainment. Let it stay whole, or don't share it at all." Several passengers nodded. Sophie lowered her phone for the first time in over an hour. She wasn't filming anymore. She was just listening. Then Marcus turned to Denise. She could barely meet his eyes. "Miss Callahan," he said, "you're being removed from passenger duty pending a full investigation. You'll have union representation. You'll have due process. But you will also have to sit with what you said today and why you believed it was justified to say it." "Yes, sir," Denise said. Her voice cracked on the second word. Captain Hale stepped forward next, hat in hand, shoulders smaller than they'd looked at 6A. "I understand," he said before Marcus could speak. "Understanding isn't the end," Marcus told him. "It's the beginning." That sentence would end up printed on a laminated card and handed to every new hire in Continental Crest's training program within 4 months. Nobody in the cabin knew that yet. They just watched a tired man in a rumpled suit walk off a plane that, in every legal sense, belonged to him. The story could stop there. Real accountability rarely does. And if you're the kind of person who wants to see what actually changes after the cameras go home, keep listening. Because the next part is the part almost nobody films. That night, Continental Crest released a statement unlike the sanitized non-apologies most airlines reach for. It didn't use the words "unfortunate incident." It didn't offer travel vouchers as a substitute for an actual answer. It confirmed, in plain language, that a passenger with fully valid documentation had been wrongfully challenged and threatened with removal based on his appearance. It announced an independent third-party review of every passenger removal logged company-wide over the previous 18 months. It announced a new internal rule. No seated, ticketed passenger could be escalated to security without 2 independently documented causes, reviewed in real time by a duty manager who was not the person making the accusation. Employees started calling it informally the Webb Standard, though Marcus never once used that name himself. By sunset, Denise Callahan and Gordon Hale had both given formal statements, not because it saved their careers, not fully, but because it was the first honest thing either of them had done all day. Denise admitted. She had confused a stranger's appearance with a stranger's right to be there. Hale admitted he had trusted a uniform over evidence sitting directly in front of him. Neither confession undid the morning. Real accountability rarely erases anything cleanly. It just starts the slow work of not repeating it. Denise never returned to lead first-class service. She was reassigned, after a 5-month review, to a ground operations role in a regional office outside Charlotte, a job with less prestige and, for the first time in 14 years, almost no unsupervised authority over a single human being's dignity. Gordon Hale was placed on administrative leave for 11 weeks and later returned, not to the cockpit of a wide-body jet, but to the training department, teaching new captains the exact scenario he had failed. He told the story himself, every session, without softening it. That was, in its own way, the harder sentence. 3 months later, Sophie Bennett flew to Denver again to see her grandmother. At the gate, she watched an agent kneel beside an elderly black veteran who seemed confused about his boarding group, speaking to him slowly, without a trace of impatience, walking him personally to the jet bridge. Sophie thought of seat 2A. She thought of a man telling a cabin full of strangers, "This starts with the passengers," and she found she was smiling before she realized it. 6 months out, Continental Crest's internal metrics showed something the company had seen in years. Escalation calls to security down by more than half. Formal complaints resolved through direct manager conversation rather than incident reports. And, buried in a spreadsheet nobody outside HR would ever read, a noticeable drop in complaints, specifically from Black and older passengers traveling alone. It wasn't perfect. Culture never turns on a single flight, but it was measurably, provably better, and better mattered more than the headline ever had. Marcus Webb never called himself a hero, and bristled slightly whenever a reporter tried to frame him as one. When a journalist asked him, weeks later, why he hadn't simply announced who he was, the moment Denise Callahan approached his seat, he turned the silver cufflink once between 2 fingers before answering. "Because then I'd only ever know how people treat a chairman," he said. "I already knew that answer. I needed to know how they treat everyone else." He kept the other cufflink in the small wooden box on his desk, exactly where it had sat for 11 years, exactly where his father had once told him it would stay until it meant something worth passing down. It already had. That's the real ending. Not a delayed flight. Not a viral clip that faded from the algorithm in 9 days like every viral clip eventually does. A man kept the seat he'd already paid for. A company was forced to look directly at its own mirror instead of past it. And somewhere in a training room in Charlotte, a captain who once trusted fear over facts now spends his Tuesdays teaching other captains not to make his mistake. If this story moved you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognized someone in it, maybe even yourself, take a second and like it, so it reaches someone who needs to hear it today. Share it with anyone who's ever been asked, in one way or another, to prove they belonged somewhere they had every right to be. And before you go, leave a comment. Have you ever been in that cabin? And which seat were you sitting in? I read every single one.